Today I'm excited to share with you Wendy Mike and her process in her studio.
In fact, the last Navy secretary was fired.
The Navy secretary is out, asked to resign over his handling of disgraced Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher. Richard Spencer.
In trying to deal with one of these interventions that the president did. And so the president has gotten into the heads of civilian leaders, including the Navy. So what Mr. Motley said, in fact, was he worried that the president, seeing what had happened about this letter being released, the president would intervene and order the captain to be dismissed before the Navy could even act on it. And that would be further embarrassment to the Navy. Mr. Motley was basically trying to preempt the president from doing what he feared he might do.
So what happens after the Navy secretary, possibly preempting the president, fires Crozier?
So on Monday, Mr. Motley, trying to tamp down the furor of his dismissal of the captain, flew 8,000
Hello.
miles to address the crew.
Let me turn that off. Welcome to my favorite place in the whole world, which is my studio. And I've had this place in the Saks building I've been in here for almost 10 years. And every time I walk in the door, I breathe a huge sigh of relief because this really is my favorite place to be. So I was really excited that you wanted to come and take a look at the process. A lot goes on in here. I'm working on a piece right now that is a fabric cast of a piece that I carved right here. You can see the resemblance. And I cover it with plastic because the material that I work with, when I put the fabric stiffener on there, and I do it all in these little tiny pieces, every little part is separate in order to be able to get it off the figure. But it becomes incredibly stiff and also really, really sticky. So everything has to be covered with plastic or things will stick to it so tightly that if I pull the fabric off and there's a tiny bit of this clay surface exposed, it'll rip it right off the figure. So it's kind of consequential. So I'm working on this figure. I love the human form. I think anyone who's familiar with my work at all will, of course, realize how in love with the human form I am. And I've been working with the human form for a really long time. Actually, since I was in high school, I started drawing nudes and then went through many years of studying the figure in New York, and then got really into abstract painting and returned to the figure about 5 or 6 years ago, something like that. And I've done really huge, great big work like that piece over there with life-size packing tape, and done gigantic installations like Ragnarok Anthropocene at the Fine Arts Center. But right now I find that my true love is being these little miniature sculptures. And they're always sort of what I consider really energetic expressions of the body in motion, because that's what really, really excites me. And I just love the human form, and I love what it does when it's moving as opposed to when it's kind of static and sitting in chairs. And so much of figure drawing is static and sitting in chairs because nobody can hold a posture like this. So the beauty of having worked with the form as much as I have is I don't need a model in order to create a figure. I do it out of my head. I just think about a pose, and I start with a piece of wire and make that into a stick figure, and then I put various materials on top of that until I wind up with a surface that sort of looks almost like marble. And in fact, this one is something that I actually looked at pictures of marble so I could get the color of this kind of beautiful rose marble. So I use a lot of my imagination, but I also have, of course, my wonderful reference books. how to draw the human figure in case I really need help with some of the anatomy. I always have that reference to work with. And so I've done a lot with fabric. I love fabric. I've always loved fabric. I actually think in another life I probably should have been like a fashion designer or something, because I love fabric and clothing. But one of the things I love about fabric is that it's incredibly lightweight and it has so much motion in it. So when I was sort of looking at sculpture that I wanted to make, I kind of thought that, you know, really the whole inside of a sculpture, I don't really know what it's doing there except to support the exterior. And I thought, well, what if I could take away the inside of a sculpture and just be left with a shell? But then if you could see both the inside and the outside of the shell, then I could play around with contrasts between the exterior, the what you sort of see immediately, and the idea of a different interior. Kind of like for all of us, I think we have what shows on the outside and then we have kind of an inner life. And so I think of these hollow fabric sculptures as kind of having an inner life that you can see from the outside, but it still kind of retains its interior space. So in order to do these casts, I actually carved my own heads. So these are actually wig heads originally. They're styrofoam heads, and I kind of took them down, sort of carved them out, and then I built them back up. And this one is covered with plastic because, again, that process of casting, you have to make it so it doesn't stick. So this one doesn't have any plastic on it right now, and you can see, you know, it's all finely rendered, and then this is what I use to actually put the fabric on to create these casts. I leave it on there, let it dry, and then very carefully peel it off. It's kind of hard to get off. And then I can finish it in these various ways of mounting it. Also, sometimes using brads or different things that I think make some kind of interesting details. So that's how those are made. Done the casts from the packing tape bodies, like using something like this to then use to form pieces like that. So these are actually from an old installation that I did, and I've been able to use them over and over and over again to create new forms. And I think that's also kind of exciting to be able to use old art, old pieces to make new pieces. And the other part of that is particularly with the miniatures is really important, is that each one of these things takes me about, I'd say maybe 40 hours to make. And when you really look at the detail of the fingers and the toes and working with something that's this tiny, it takes so long to make these that it also is really wonderful to me to be able to get another rendition, another piece out of a piece. So you can see that these were cast from the same, this was cast from here. And then in the same way, this was also cast from this form. So that's how I kind of am efficient in creating work. The other thing that I really had a lot of fun with is these kinds of different ways of mounting. So in the past I've done a lot of suspension, and I still love the suspended form because, again, these are depictions of the body in motion, and it's awfully nice to have them be able to move. There's something really, really satisfying to me about non-static figurative sculpture because, you know, people don't in general sit very still. And so I love it that they can move and spin. But I also have really had fun, particularly with the fabric pieces, which are so lightweight, of really grounding them. And I've loved using this juniper that I've found on hikes up in Guffey, or pieces of driftwood that I've gotten from, my family owns land in upstate New York on Lake Ontario, and that's where some of these pieces of driftwood come from. And then also coral, which I actually found in a house that I was helping to clean out, this huge bag of coral in the garage. So I've been using coral to mount some of these pieces as well. And I love how that natural element that has so much motion in it. I mean, look at the incredible beauty of this wood and the veins and the grain in it. It just swirls around and it has so much motion in it, but there's a solidity, and I feel like it makes a really great base for the little very lightweight fabric pieces that are mounted on there. And even these still move, they still spin. And that's how I like it. I like them to have that ability to move. So you could sort of position it however you want. So that's a little bit about the cast pieces. I just wanted to say a little bit about the winged woman form, because I've actually been working with this form on some level since I was a teenager. I first started drawing women with wings when I was 16, and I didn't even know that there was such a thing as the Winged Victory of Samothrace or the Nike at the Louvre. But when I went to Paris in 1992 and saw the Winged Victory, it sort of was a resurgence of all of this interest in the winged woman form. And I think that then led into the fascination I have now with the human figure. And I always name my pieces after various goddesses that embody certain attributes of humanity, particularly as expressed in women. And I love the beauty of the human form, but in some cases too, I love like the energetic expressions of a goddess like Artemis, the virgin huntress, who's very forthright and very self-possessed, a sort of a pre-sexualized being, as well as Aphrodite, who is the embodiment of female sexuality and beauty. And so I keep exploring these archetypes that I see in the human form, and it really all started with this Winged Victory of Samothrace.